Hey everyone, it's Amy and welcome to my channel. I hope you're all healthy and well on this Christmas day. In today's video, I'm sharing my top running podcasts and running books from 2020 and a few books that I want to read in the new year. Feel free to check me on Instagram at amy.spurr-Caveney where I post more running and music related things. So let's talk about my top 2020 podcasts and running books. I think I got into podcasts around 2015 when Serial was released. I remember being on tour that summer with an orchestra and listening to the Serial podcast at night and just being so obsessed with it. This was my first exposure to podcasts and now I just love them. When I used to travel a lot for work and being on transit, I used to always have a podcast downloaded on my phone to listen to. Now being home and not traveling as much, I listen to podcasts mostly at night. Though if sometimes I'm going for a walk or just alone and I want to hear another voice, I throw on a podcast. I love the sport of running and I just want to know about my favorite athletes and the latest drama and the latest news and results and just kind of different topics about running too. I think podcasts are so great as you can just listen while you're walking, or if you just don't look at a screen. Reading, sometimes it's nice to have a break, but I just learned so much from podcasts and I just have so many that I listen to. The first podcast I'm going to talk about is the Shakeout Podcast. It's hosted by two Canadian runners, Kate Van Buskert and Maddie Kelly. Most Canadian runners will have listened to this podcast, but if you haven't, definitely check it out. Each week they share the news, drama, and results from the world of running. I like that they talk about Canadian runners as it's just so important to know about our own runners in Canada, but also they do share the international news as well, and it's just really cool to hear their insight, and I love the banter and conversations they have. It's just a really good listen. They've recently started a mini-series in their podcast about doping in the sport of running. Again, as a Canadian runner, it's important to support Canadian runners as well, and just hearing about their accomplishments. If you haven't listened to this podcast, definitely check it out. Running for Real by Tina Muir is another podcast I really enjoy listening to. Tina Muir is a retired British runner who recently had her second baby. She's really present on social media, especially Instagram, and her posts are not just about running but social issues. And I find her posts really deep and I really resonate with me and just makes me think about things just in a different light, or just makes me think about things maybe in general, just what I actually think about it. For example, social media itself, mental health, climate change, and just so many other issues. One of my favorite episodes from this past year was episode 195, Sorry Not Sorry, Stop Minimizing Yourself. It really made me aware of how many times I said sorry, but really didn't need to say sorry. It was just super eye-opening, especially as a female, how often we say sorry. Tina often says at the beginning of her podcast that she doesn't like to ask the usual questions about where they came from, what they do, etc., but she wants to go into deeper things and deeper questions and deeper answers. I just highly recommend this podcast as she covers running, but also just kind of deeper issues as well that go along with running or just life in general. I also love her British accent, so it's pretty fun to listen to, so check that one out as well. The Strength Running Podcast. Jason Fitzgerald is the host of Strength Running Podcast. He also has a website and YouTube channel. He talks about strength, which may be obvious from the title of the podcast, but he also covers issues like nutrition and injury prevention. He believes that strength training is super important for every runner, not just the elite runner, and to prevent injuries and just to become a healthier, stronger runner. He has various guests like pro athletes, registered dietitians, and people in the medical field. He's very straightforward, and you can tell that he really just cares about the health of runners and wanting people to stay injury-free and just be stronger in general. I personally have watched so many videos on his YouTube channel about strength training and different exercises, and he just does a really good job of explaining things, and I really enjoy it. His website, YouTube channel, and podcast is a great resource for runners, and I highly recommend this podcast as well. One episode I really enjoyed was episode 156 when he interviews Anne Mori, who is a registered dietitian. They talk about nutrition, weight loss, and so many other issues. And don't worry, I'll have the link to all these podcasts in the description below, so you can definitely check them out for yourself. Another podcast is the Run Free Podcast by Ryan Hall. Ryan Hall is just an amazing athlete, and his wife is one of my favorite athletes, Sarah Hall. But anyways, Ryan still holds the American half marathon record with a time of, 59:43, holy moly. And he became the first American man to run a sub 2:05 marathon in 2011 at Boston. His wife is also super fast and is sponsored by ASICS, and she recently just won the Marathon Project in Arizona, and she was just 1 minute off Dina Castor's American record of the marathon. So fast! Anyways, they're both amazing runners, and people in general. They've adopted 4 girls, I can't remember exactly where from, but they just are so kind and they just love the sport of running so much, and that's just You can tell from his podcast and just their posts on social media, and just the way they hold themselves is just really cool to see. I find Ryan just a little, he's so dorky, but he's really fun to listen to, and obviously he knows his stuff because so vast, but I really like the issues that he talks about. Sometimes it's just him talking about a certain topic, but he does interview other people as well. One of my favorite episodes was episode 56 when he talks about nutrition and off-season weight. He's just so chill, and I really enjoy listening to him talk. Convos over Coldbrew. I recently started listening to this podcast by Emma Abrahamson. Emma is not only a cold brew fanatic like her title of her podcast suggests, but also a runner and recently transitioning to the triathlon. I first found her on YouTube as she has a YouTube channel, which I really enjoy, and she talks about running and just kind of what she eats and just so many other things. On this podcast, she interviews her friends who are mostly runners, and they talk about just everything with running, news, life things, it's just a cool conversation. She also has a food Instagram account called One Crazed Foodie, and I've gotten actually a few recipes from it, and they're really good. I'll definitely have the link for that in the description below as well. Anyways, it's just a cool listen. You can listen to it while you run or walk or just have in the background. Another podcast I've been listening to for a while is I'll Have Another by Lindsay Hine. I really like her podcast because she gets current runners who's just done maybe a race or before a race and gets to talk to them, and it's just, it feels really current. She's easy to listen to and gets a really good conversation going with her guests. One of my favorite episodes is episode 267 when she talks with Emma Coburn. Emma Coburn is just one of my favorite runners, and I follow her on Instagram, and she's just like my age, I believe, and it's just really cool. I wish she was my friend. Again, her episodes are a little longer, but you can break them up into several listens or just have it playing in the background or before you go to sleep and you fall asleep before the end. The next few podcasts I'm going to share, I don't listen to all the time, but I do enjoy listening to them when I do, and I have listened to them in the past, so I wanted to share them with you. The Clean Sport Collective is a really interesting podcast. It's hosted by Kara Gocher, who competed for the States in the 10,000 meter and the marathon distance at the Olympics, as well as Shanna Burnett, who's Kara's agent. And lastly, it's hosted by Chris McClung. Chris is the co-owner of Rogue Running, which is based in Austin, Texas. Their goal with this podcast is to bring awareness and to celebrate the pursuit of clean sport. They want to educate their listeners, especially on clean sport, and bring up issues in regards to it. I find the topic of clean sport and just the questions they ask really interesting, and I really highly recommend this podcast. One of my favorite episodes so far is episode 48 when they interview Ben Rosario. I just love Ben, and he's so interesting, and if you don't know, he's the coach of the NAS Elite in Arizona, and he's just churning out these amazing marathoners, but he's just a really cool guy, and I really like hearing him talk. And the last podcast I listen to is Endurance Minded. This podcast is hosted by Thomas Taylor. He's the founder and one of the coaches at Thomas Endurance Coaching, as well as this podcast too. The episodes on his podcast really dive deep into the psychological, the emotional, and the mental kind of components that drive athletes to go and push themselves further and further in endurance sports like running. I've always enjoyed psychology, and when I found this podcast, I was really excited just to kind of dive into what makes our brain tick, and especially for running, and just the mind has such an impact on how you feel during your run and can really just affect your race especially, or just your workouts. Your mind is so powerful, and your body could probably be okay to do something, but if your mind is not okay, then it's just game over. One episode I really resonated was from September 5th, 2019. This episode he interviews Ben Rosario again. Kind of obsessed with Ben, but really good episode. And it's called Love the Pain, Love the Process. So definitely check that episode out if you can. I haven't read as many running books as I would have liked this year, but I'm going to share the ones that I've read and really enjoyed, and maybe a few of the ones that I want to read maybe next year. So the first one I highly recommend is Let Your Mind Run by Dina Castor. Dina is such an amazing athlete and person in general, and still holds the American marathon record, which is so crazy because if you think about all the technology and shoes that's happened in the past few years, and she still holds it. It's just a tribute to how strong of a runner she was and still is, and just I really, really highly recommend this book. It's called A Memoir of Thinking My Way to Victory. She talked about how positive thinking had a huge impact and how she was able to get all these big runs and really amazing times in. So, Let Your Mind Run by Dina Castor. Very good. Another book I recently read this year was How Bad Do You Want It by Matt Fitzgerald. I read this before my virtual marathon and actually finished the morning of, perfect timing, but it was just really helpful to prepare myself mentally for the virtual marathon or just running a marathon in general. And if you've run a marathon, you know how tough the end can be, or just any race in general, the end is so hard. So I wanted to prepare myself mentally, because I know that I could physically maybe, or I hoped I physically could do it, but I knew my brain would be like, you should give up now, and I wanted to kind of just prepare myself. So anyways, I really like this book. It's like sports psychology, and Matt is just a really good writer, and he has a bunch of other books too. So I definitely recommend reading this one, especially before a race or just to start a new training build. This is just a really good kind of reminder of how strong you are, actually. Born to Run by Christopher McDougall is another book that I read this past year. In this book, Christopher goes on a journey to discover the secrets of the Terramahura runners. He wants to know why they can run so long without getting injured. This book also introduced me into knowing some of the amazing and really talented ultramarathoners in the States, like Scott Jurek, for example, and Ann Trayson. While I probably won't read this again for a while, I definitely recommend you reading it at least once. I'm currently reading this, Running with the Kenyans. I probably won't finish, maybe before the end of the year, but it's by, oh my goodness, can't say his name, Andandan Finn. I'm really enjoying it so far, and it's just, I can't believe he just uprooted his whole family and moved to Kenya for an entire year so he could discover the secrets of the amazing Kenyan runners. I haven't finished this book, but so far I think this would be a really good book for anyone who likes to run and reading about running, and just, it's a really cool read, so definitely recommend Running with the Kenyans. Lastly, this isn't a novel, but I really think this is a great resource for any runner who kind of wants to get some exercises, talks about training, nutrition, just a really cool resource to have. This is called Science of Running. Analyze your technique, prevent injury, revolutionize your training. It's really detailed and laid out really well, and I guess I'm just kind of a nerd, but I love it, and I just love reading about all the nitty-gritty kind of training adaptations and just everything. So definitely recommend reading this if you're interested in stuff like that, or if not, that's okay. Now I'm just gonna briefly tell you about the books that I want to read next. The first one is Ryan Howell's book, Run the Mile You're In. As I said before, Ryan is such an amazing athlete, and I just really want to hear more about his kind of journey and how his faith helped him in his training and just his career in general and just his mindset, so I'm excited to read that next. Running to the Edge by Matthew Futterman is another book that I just can't wait to read. It's about Bob Larson, and if you don't know him, he's one of America's greatest running coaches. The rest of the title is cool. It says, A Band of Misfits and the Guru Who Unlocked the Secrets of Speed. So that just intrigues me, and I just want to know more about him, because the first time I heard about him is in Dina Castor's book, because he was Dina's coach, so obviously he knows something about coaching, and just all the people who's trained under him have done so well, and just in Dina's book, I was just so fascinated by him, even though we didn't really get from his perspective, but I'm just really excited to read this book. Eat and Run by Scott Jurek, who was an ultramarathoner who I first read about in Born to Run, and I'm just really excited. He's just done some amazing races and runs in his life, and I just could never run an ultramarathon, or you know what, I could, but I don't want to yet. But anyways, I'm just excited to hear about his perspective again, and just in a world that I don't really know much about, so I definitely want to read that one soon. And lastly, Matt Fitzgerald, The Comeback Quotient, which is coming out, I'm not sure, I have to look up again when it comes out, but it has Molly Seidel on the cover, so it's obviously going to be really good. I'll let you know what I think about after I read it. I know there's so many more books and podcasts out there, but these are just the ones that I read and listened to and have really enjoyed, so I wanted to share them with you. Do you have any books or podcast suggestions? Please tell me in a comment below. As always, if you like this video, tap that thumbs up button. And if you haven't already, click the subscribe button and the bell icon so you get notified every time I upload a new video. Happy reading and listening to podcasts, and I'll see you next time.